Hello everyone, my name is Ceshawny. I'm here with Ramon and Lorenzo, and we're going to talk about gender, social media, and language. And I'm going to start off by defining gender using this chart here. So gender is something you identify with. It can be male, female. If you think of gender as a scale, you can identify as anything in between or none of it at all. And depending on what you identify as, there's a culture that can influence the way you express yourself. So if you identify as more male, you may express yourself more feminine, more masculinely. And if you identify as female, you may express yourself more femininely. And we're going to focus on language expression between the two. A researcher named John Gray came up with men are from Mars and women are from Venus because he believed that the two were so fundamentally different. It has been acknowledged that there are differences between the two, enough so that a two-culture hypothesis was created. Some of the differences noted in male speech include sentence fragments, like cool shirt and nice photo. They are more likely to use I references, which means they're more likely to talk about themselves, and use more judgmental language. Women were more likely to use longer sentences, use more references to feelings and intensive adverbs. An example of that would be really in he's really cute, or so in this line is so long. Women were also more likely to be less assertive, more uncertain, and include more tag questions. A tag question is a statement followed by a question, like, you can understand me, right? Or do you think so? Anthony Mulak, another researcher, also believed that the language of women was overall more tentative, elaborate, emotional, and less powerful than male speech, but much more inclusive. And here's a chart that explains more differences between the language of male and females. The good news is that although there seem to be major differences between the two, they're not very clear-cut when observed directly. This suggests that our speech is much more similar than we thought. A study in 2011 with 3,000 participants found that women were only slightly more likely to use tentative speech than men. A more recent study in 2015 had men and women describe their health and found that although women tend to use more intensive adverbs, when the participants were tasked with reading each other's transcripts, they weren't able to identify the gender. In a different study involving the same researchers, they observed how men, women, and transgender women described a painting. Although the transgender women tended to sound similar to men, their speech was otherwise indistinguishable from others. And now we're going to talk about other influences on language.
Hi class, my name is Ramon, and I'll be talking about other influences on language. So gender isn't the only influence on language. For example, there's profession. When it comes to female and male athletes, it's found that they communicate in a very similar fashion. But when it comes to male teachers in relation to female teachers, you find that the male teachers usually try to copy the way that the female teachers communicate. But when it comes to female farm workers, it is found that they talk in a more masculine fashion. And all these reasons is probably because when you see the opposite gender having more success in the way that they communicate and talk, you try to emulate that. So power plays a bigger role in communication than gender does. An example of this is when it comes to a same-sex relationship, the conversation style is based more on power, like who makes more money or who brings more stuff to the table and who offers more. And you'll always find difference in communication between power levels, for instance, between bosses or employees or subordinates. So social status also plays a big role in communication and oftentimes shows up more clearly in language than gender differences do. This could be in part because of who you hang around with and what opportunities you're afforded to, for example, education and activities that you're able to do. And right here is just a picture of some pigeons that I thought was funny. So just to conclude this, the simple answer is that there are some differences between male and female language patterns. However, those distinctions may not be as significant as some claim, and they might occur for reasons other than gender or biological sex of the communicator. And this is just a YouTube video that I found was a nice conclusion.
Do women talk differently than men? It's complicated. This is the third and final part of this little mini-series on language and gender. In the first part, I talked about grammatical gender. In the second part, I talked about gender dialects. But this video is going to be more about the stylistic use of language between men and women in English. The work that really launched this was a publication by sociolinguist Robin Lakoff called Language in Women's Place. And it's about how women use language in relation to social power. In this book, Lakoff kind of outlines some common ways that women speak. And this included several patterns like tag questions. You like this band, right? You don't like that, do you? And the use of hypercorrect and polite forms, using proper grammar and standard pronunciation. Lakoff's work, which was published in 1973, was revolutionary for its time. It brought a lot of important feminist topics into the field of linguistics, which was at the time very much white male-dominated. But one of the weaknesses of this publication was that it lacked empirical data. There wasn't enough data gathered to make a scientific claim about women's language. But it was a starting point to investigate these perceived gender differences. Since its publication, linguists in the field have gathered data to investigate these claims. For example, Lakoff claimed that tag questions were used more by women than men. But when a study was conducted by Beryl Dubois and Isabel Crouch in 1975, they found that in both informal and formal situations, men used tag questions just as much as women did, refuting Lakoff's original observation. Work by sociolinguist William Labov showed that women do tend to be more conservative in how they use language, which agreed with Lakoff's original claim. But later in his research, Labov says women lead linguistic innovation, that they're the first to use new forms, which is completely contradictory. One thing we have to be aware of when we're talking about language of a certain gender is that we're simultaneously talking about race and social class and other kind of factors. What Lakoff and Labov considered women's speech was only representative of white, upper and middle class women. And those women occupy distinct social and linguistic spaces. So the language a white woman uses is going to be different than the language a black woman uses versus a Latina woman versus a South Asian woman, etc., etc., etc. And then there are even more differences in between each of those types when you take into account things like socioeconomic status, sexuality, political affiliation, religious affiliation. A Southern Baptist white woman from Mississippi is going to sound a lot different than a white hipster in Oregon, because they inhabit completely different social spaces. So to say that one speech quality can be attributed to all women is just kind of misleading when you consider how variable this category of women really is. Additionally, we know now that men and women aren't absolute categories, but rather spectrums of behaviors and expressions. And there are lots of people who don't fit into that binary classification. Additionally, we can change how we speak depending on who we're around. We'll speak differently to our friends versus our boss. The white hipster in Oregon can change her speech in an instant and sound like Hillary Clinton or Dolly Parton or Kim Kardashian, and each of those has special unique features. And because of that variability, we can't say, oh, all women speak this way, all women use this kind of thing.
So that's the end of my section. But differences in language by gender are sometimes easier to spot and measure in online communication, as Lorenzo will discuss in this next section.
Hello everyone, my name is Lorenzo and my section is on social media and language. There are different styles and principles of language that are used in the three main forms of communication, which are face-to-face communication, which means there's actually a physical person right next to me holding a conversation with me, mediated conversation, which are phone calls and video chats, and online communication, which are text messages, emails, and social media messages. In social media and language, there are two topics in this discussion: online language and impression management, and online language and gender. Online language and impression management. Impression management is a conscious or subconscious process in which people attempt to influence the perceptions of other people about a person or object by regulating and controlling information within the social interaction. This means that information is generally withheld or skewed to make the person talking sound or look better to the other person. Text message errors. Text message errors in online language might make the sender look bad due to the fact that with the advances in spell check technology, along with the ease of accessibility of it already being built into most devices, might make the user seem lazy or unprofessional to submit work with some spelling or grammatical errors. Technological signatures. A technological signature can also be troublesome due to the fact that the credibility of a professional document or memo can be negated as unprofessional when the ending postscript states, "This was written on my cell phone." Emails. Emails are still the mainstay of communication in the business world. Professional messages are less informal when written on a smartphone as opposed to an office computer. An email written on an office computer is way more formal due to the fact that it generally includes a greeting and a similar closing statement. If an email is written on a smartphone, then it implies that the composer is too busy and doesn't have time to be too friendly. Impression management through dating websites. Dating websites are all about impression management. Subscribers to online dating services can manipulate their photos, videos, and self-descriptions. Women are most likely to lie about their age and weight, whereas men are most likely to lie about their income and professions. Social networking websites such as Facebook also play a role in online language due to the fact that when you're communicating with your friends through public status updates, one tends to put your best foot forward and use positive, warm, and upbeat tones rather than private messages to display these emotions. Online language and gender. Men and women have different language styles which show up online. Men tend to use more larger and more swear words than women do. Women tend to use more personal pronouns, verbs, and catchphrases. For example, I think, I know, I want. Women and men also tend to use the word we in different tones as well. Women use it in a more warmer tone. For example, we have so much fun together. And men tend to use it in a more distant tone. For example, we need to do something about this. Women use more emotion in their words and first-person singular pronouns to refer to people in their lives. For example, my friend, our trip, her dog. Men use more object references and swear words in their online language. The book, that pen, the Xbox. In online interactions, computer programs can identify the sex of the author about 67 to 72% of the time due to these tones and styles used in online language. People tend to change their online language depending on their gender identities. In a study where people were randomly assigned different gender avatars, some matching their biological sex, some not, people who were assigned female avatars used more emotion, more apologies, and used more tentative language than those with masculine avatars. In adolescence, online language differs as well. Boys are more active and assertive, initiating conversation and making proposals. Boys also tend to be more flirtatious and sexual, whereas girls tend to be more reactive. Studies have shown that these distinctions tend to recede into adulthood as well. In the end, I believe that it is extremely important to self-monitor your online language because, if not formatted properly, a badly sent email can scar one's professional career as a whole, and in social media is important also because many of these conversations are displayed publicly and can be archived for future accessibility. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.